The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast. How effective is your WAF protection? Metrics and key considerations. Sponsored by ThreatX. My name is Carol, author of SANS, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Chris Brasjunas, Chief Product Officer at ThreatX, and Will Woodson, Lead Security Engineer at ThreatX. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to turn the webcast over to Chris.
Thanks, Carol. Hey, everybody. So my name is Chris Brasjunas, and I'm from the ThreatX team. As you know, my role is the Chief Product Officer, and I'm here today and fortunate to be joined by my teammate, Will. Will, how about you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Will Woodson. I'm a lead security engineer here at ThreatX. I work with our security operations team to, I guess, pretty much monitor and write rules for our customers.
Awesome. So we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about measuring effectiveness with web application protection. And the goal is, by the end of this session, hopefully you come away with a few ideas to prioritize with your team. So today, we're going to talk first about the role of WAF in the enterprise and application security. And then next, we're going to move over to the understanding and talking about the need for metrics. And then last, I'd like to propose some metrics you might consider for your app security program. So today, most enterprises have a large number of externally facing applications supporting the business directly, involved in the revenue of the business and in support of the business. And if yours is like many others, only a small number of those apps are actually protected with a security tool. Those that are protected are likely motivated through some sort of compliance regulation. And here I show PCI 6.6, which suggests utilization of some sort of web application protection. So the need of WAF has often been associated with threats identified by OWASP. And I'm sure you're aware of most of those threat classifications, such as injections and third-party product vulnerabilities. So as a result, testing of web applications has traditionally focused on OWASP, quite frankly, identifying security risks coupled with some scheduled pen testing. So there have been challenges, and let's talk about them. So those historic challenges with WAF often lead to most applications being deployed, or web application protection only being deployed really where necessary. And most organizations, from what Gartner has recently surveyed, only have 10 to 15% of their apps actually protected. The challenge? Well, it's related to their design dependency on signature-based detection. And that design can lead to really high operational burden on security teams from a tuning perspective that eventually yields small gains. And we'll take a closer look at this next slide. So the problem with WAF signatures is honestly in the way they are constructed for security attack identification. They can be constructed in a narrow and precise way, or conversely, in a broad manner. Those that are constructed in a precise manner, looking for several different elements of an attack that are maybe within an HTTP request, can lead to high positives, which is really good. They also can be easily evaded, and that's not so good. So precise signatures also require quite a bit of labor on the behalf of the security team. On the other hand, signatures can be broad, offer good coverage, and unfortunately also mistake valid user activity for threats, resulting in higher than desired false positives. My teammate Will here has a lot of experiences in this area, so I'd like for him to share some of the experiences as an app security analyst. So Will, what is a typical signature that is deployed in a traditional WAF that may be too narrow?
Sure. So typically a signature that's too narrow is going to look like a point rule for a CVE. So those are great for a quick virtual patch. You can get them into your WAF and not have to update the application necessarily that quickly. However, they typically will still only cover kind of one or a couple forms of the exploit. They'll be based on what POCs are known, proof of concept that's been published publicly, and they might not cover every different variety of that vulnerability. So your entire rule base really cannot be made just of CVE specific rules.
That makes sense. I guess you get this false sense of security when you think you have those rules set against the CVEs. So, and looking at this from the other spectrum, what may be some example of signatures that might be too broad, yielding false positives?
Yeah, so I guess a big thing for too broad signatures would be things around anomalous, detection of anomalies. So if that's anomalous character detection, for example, I can go pick on a mod security common rule set rule that is designed to pick up the number of special characters in a post request. That's great. It can look like you can include special characters in your post request, your pound signs, your exclamation points, your ampersands, and so forth. But if you also will see, plenty of post requests that are perfectly benign that do include that. So you can't only choose to alert or block based off of things that are a little bit weird looking alone.
So that makes sense. And so overall, signature-based protection is incomplete, and it's honestly pretty hard to manage. So there's a clear need to improve web application protection. And as we know, web apps are quite frankly growing, which leads to what we see as a far broader attack surface. We hear the volume of attacks increasing just in 2019. When you think about it, how many times have you heard about numerous account takeover and credential stuffing attacks? I feel like I've been hearing about those every other week. And then there are third-party vulnerabilities, such as the ones associated with Magento, that have been recently exploited. And for those of you who don't know what Magento is, it's a common base infrastructure used for many e-commerce sites, which is why it's also often a target for attacks. And APIs are also adding to that larger attack surface. They're growing fast with the move to cloud native and microservices-based applications. And APIs are predicted to be the main attack vector that needs to be protected from a security perspective by your organizations by 2022. And I'd like to give you an idea of just how much growth there's been in this area of APIs. This data is from a site called Programmable Web, which is a technical site focused on the API economy and the programmable web. And I suggest you check it out. It's pretty cool. What you see in this chart is the number of APIs is growing exponentially since 2010 and all the way to 2018. And if we had to guess, over the next few years, that curve is just going to get, and slope is just going to get steeper. So the point I'm trying to emphasize here is that API security is something that is worth putting on your radar as part of web application protection in 2019. So now I'd like to talk briefly about metrics and security. It's good to remind ourselves from a big picture level why we need metrics. First, I'm sure you've heard this one before, and it's important to remember. One can only really effectively manage something that can be measured. And security risk is important to manage because, for one reason, it's for budget. Budget is limited for security, which is often viewed as a cost center in the organization. And as a result, it's something that needs to be justified. So measurements of security can really help justify future budgets, particularly in AppSec. We know no solution is really perfect. And security risk isn't something that will just go away by throwing in that perfect process or that new tool. So it is ideal, honestly, if there are metrics aligning to the value a security investment offers to the enterprise. And it's easier to make those trade-offs and priority decisions when we have those types of metrics. Now, here's what I believe is reality in many enterprises. High web application availability and traffic correlate to positive business metrics, and that's really good. So it's incredibly important that availability is high and there are sufficient resources for all that good traffic to interact well with the application. Now, let's talk about the unfortunate side. Many organizations lack empirical data around web application protection effectiveness. They count on indicators such as those listed on this slide below, and I'll let you read them, to see that the environment's working okay. None of those are empirical measures that you see here, and as a result, a security concern where the only way you know about it you may only know about it by an end user reporting it, and clearly that is not ideal. So Will, you interact a lot with web application protection customers of ours. Here's a question for you. When you first speak to customers, what is the approach you hear they use in determining whether their WAF is really working?
Yeah, so I mean, by far the most common evaluation, or I guess measurement method that we see from our customers, or really across the board, is automated vulnerability scanning. That's picking a tool that has a set of rules in there and running it against your applications and kind of trying to measure your false negatives, false positives out of your web application, measuring if you get anything coming back from the web application that might indicate a vulnerability and so on. And this is reasonable, but the scans, I guess, that are performed by these vulnerability scanning tools don't necessarily line up particularly well with your individual application or the kind of the risk or exposure that you might see in practice for that application.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's a testing tool, and it's kind of a quality validation. It doesn't really tell you in real time, is it working?
Right.
Right. And so obviously that's a limitation. So most enterprises are maintaining application security metrics, and there are a lot of good ones out there. So in this chart, you'll see some of them. So I've categorized a group relating to software development activity and security process. Now, in this set includes things like number of developers trained in AppSec, or the number of pen tests completed in a given time. And the last one I really like myself is something called BSIM. And I'm not sure how many of you have heard about BSIM before. It stands for Building Security in Maturity Model. And it's a set of defined security practices that are updated annually by that group, where you can measure yourself against peer enterprises that have been scored against this framework. So BSIM publishes those security practices and scores for about 100+ enterprises on an annual basis. So you can compare yourself against all those companies, or you can compare against any subset. Maybe you want to take the ones from a given vertical, and maybe you want to take the ones that are more closely related to your size. And I find this to be a pretty nice measure of security maturity against peers. So I encourage you to check it out. So there's a second category of metric, and this category categorizes potential risk associated with an application. So they're mainly software related. So this set includes things like defect counts and vulnerability counts, maybe grouped by criticality and various types. And then the CVE security validation time, or the time it takes for a CVE to come out to the time that you have validated that either the CVE is not something you need to be concerned about because it has been mitigated, or you put a fix in place. And so all of the above on this slide, honestly, are really good metrics, and I'd recommend you monitor and measure at least some of them. Additionally, though, it's important to measure the effectiveness and coverage of your web security protection solution. And that's what we want to talk about next. Here, we're going to talk about a metrics-based approach for web protection. The first step in identifying web protection metrics is to let's look at the big picture. What are we trying to achieve as a security organization? And with that, it's time to understand your goals and objectives as they relate to application security. Those goals could be related to compliance, such as the regulatory requirements out there or various industry standards. It could be related to availability and to ensure that the applications are available at the level of availability that you need, and are also available from a responsiveness perspective for your users. Your top objective could be related to security integrity, ensuring that PII data or other sorts of sensitive data are being protected well in your infrastructure. And then last, it could be related to simply to brand equity. None of us want to be the one that has a company that's written about a breach. Although, quite frankly, when it happens, I applaud those companies who just tell it like it is and then do the right job in trying to investigate and the attack and clean it up. So Will, what security objectives have customers shared with you?
Yeah, so it definitely depends a little bit on I guess, who's sharing or who you're asking. In general, I guess I would say, customers or people that have a WAF in place want to block all the bad things and none of the good things. And that's, easier said than done, of course. But people do want to be able to use their WAF as an active security control that's actually in line and actually can take I guess measures to stop malicious traffic. But kind of in service of the availability metric or availability goal, which we're definitely all beholden to. Often a WAF doesn't necessarily get out of monitoring or kind of a visibility mode.
Yeah. So availability obviously being a key business metric aligned to the business.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to understand at a big picture what you are trying to achieve and what you're trying to manage. So the metric you identify then should be well aligned to one or more of the objectives that you do identify. So now let's talk about first metric, and I'd like to introduce it. It's called portfolio coverage. So one goal of your enterprise could be to ensure all your APIs and apps are protected with a security tool. This seems like a really simple metric, and it is, so long as you have all applications and APIs cataloged as well as identified. The metric shows the number of applications and APIs, excuse me. So it shows the number of applications and APIs in your enterprise that are under protection over time. And see here, the metric is being trended on a monthly basis, identifying the number of apps and APIs protected versus the total number that are cataloged. And as I mentioned earlier, most enterprises only protect 20% or less of their apps, which is pretty small. One reason is because of the high operational costs managing signatures that are associated with traditional WAFs. The second reason the number is low is because most enterprises do not formally catalog their applications or APIs. And this seems surprising, yet something we as a vendor really see. So Will, any thoughts as to why customers might find it hard to maintain a catalog of APIs and apps?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a responsibility that goes beyond just a security team. It's really an organization-wide kind of practice that you have to adopt. Making sure you're going to, I guess, have a good inventory of your applications, web applications, and kind of your potential exposure. It does come down a lot to just overall, I guess I could call it organizational or enterprise process. If it's possible to spin up an application without having all the right parties involved, or alternatively, if it's too difficult of a process to get all the proper parties involved, including your security or AppSec team, then people are going to go around that process. There's not great alignment between whether it's IT, security, or IT and security and the business.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, I think a lot of that time that they go around the process is not by necessarily a real intent. It's just more by ignorance and maybe not understanding that broad picture and that broad need. Is that what you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's anyone out there saying that someone is intentionally trying to circumvent, process or policy or wants to necessarily expose your organization to more risk. But if the process isn't in place and you don't know who to talk to, then yeah, things are going to slip through the cracks.
Yeah, I totally agree on this one, and I can say that for someone who's run a lot of engineering organizations, that it's not so easy to pull everything together, especially when they're cross-organizational. So now I'm going to move on. The next metric I'd like to talk about is attack frequency, and with this metric, the goal is to understand how often applications of yours are getting attacked, and what are the true peaks and valleys? When do they occur? So here we're looking at the percentage of traffic labeled as attacked against all traffic. And this metric could be computed against a HTTP request count or with real traffic measures if you have them. So with this type of metric trended, you can see the days of the week and the times of year when the security risk around your applications are highest. And I think this can be incredibly useful for security risk planning from an operational standpoint. So keep it in mind. So now I'd like to talk about attack classification. The goal is to understand the types of attack behaviors that are observed in your application set. So you can think of these behaviors as techniques that you would find in the MITRE ATT&CK framework that hopefully many of you are familiar with now. The metric offers the count of attacks grouped by classification here. These are attack classifications. Those could include injection or directory traversal and brute force. The counts are over a given time period, and it's best to look at them by application. And if I had a recommendation, I'd probably look at these over a broader time period, like minimally a week, if not a month, and maybe also a quarter. So Will, you've seen a lot of attacks. What are the most common attack techniques or behaviors you're seeing recently?
Yeah, we definitely see a good bit of data coming from up from our customers in the SOC. From a pure volume perspective, it's definitely scanning, and scanning takes many forms. Some of that is very generic. It's kind of large volume content scraping, potentially going to go replicate your content somewhere else, or just automated browsing without necessarily any clear purpose, but it's really just sapping bandwidth, sapping content. And the other side of that is vulnerability scanning. That might be SQL injection. That might be looking for known vulnerabilities in your common CMS content management system frameworks out there on the internet. But those are it's almost internet-wide background noise practically. It's scanning for applications and versions of those applications which are known to have a specific flaw. Now, if you are running an older version of those applications, haven't patched it, don't have any other mitigating controls in place, then it's going to get found out and compromised by that large volume of just scanning noise.
Yeah, that is the one thing that's pretty scary. It's amazing how when a new CVE comes out and then the POC is presented, how fast we see attacks. I mean, literally, is it within a day?
It can definitely be within a day. Sometimes we will see a 0 day where it'll be in the wild. You'll see scanning traffic out on the internet before necessarily there's much information in a formal announcement. In others, it's especially in your larger CMSs, your critical vulnerabilities, your Drupal-Geddon coming out last year, right?
Yep.
You will see scanning definitely within 24 hours. And it's not just against Drupal sites, it's against the entire internet.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So what's the benefit here of having a metric that's associated with the different types of behavior or attack classifications? And in my thought, it enables you as an enterprise to prioritize the investment in improved software quality around those types of attacks. What probably matters most is what your applications are experiencing yourself. And this metric provides that. There are a lot of reports out there from security vendors, publishing what they've seen in the last year. And ThreatX, will also be doing the same. But what probably is going to be most effective for you is seeing what your attacks, what your applications are experiencing. And that is why I really recommend getting this type of metric over time. So it's important to have a measure of an operational pain point. And false positives, well, that's a big one. So this measure shows the traffic that is identified wrongly as an attack over time. Wrongly identified attacks are traffic that came from legitimate users and was unfortunately blocked or didn't make it through. Hopefully, this percentage is low, and there are going to be times where it's going to be higher than you like, and it's in those times that it's really important to empirically see it. So then you can respond and do the right thing. Let's figure out what's going on. Does it have something to do with the security tool? Did the application change? Or is there some sort of configuration error in the infrastructure? So having a measure allows you to see that sensitivity change and allow you to respond more quickly. So the last metric I'm going to suggest here is one that profiles your good traffic. The traffic hopefully is largely initiated by a real person for the most part. We also know there is good and necessary traffic that is automated for the purposes of things like search and the various search crawlers that are out there. So over time, it's important to understand the trends across both of these so you can predict the amount of capacity you need across the year, and so you can also be able to identify changes to regular traffic patterns, which also could signify some sort of issue. So in summary, I'm going to leave you with a few thoughts. First, don't settle for casual or soft metrics. If you want to manage something important, and web app protection, that's important. It should have metrics around it. Those metrics should align to your security business objectives. So take the time and define them. And take the time to identify the few metrics that you will monitor regularly. Just one or two is a great start. And last, ensure your vendors meet your needs. Great vendors will adapt to those needs that they hear from customers because they listen well. So now I'd like to leave you with one last thing. I'd like to call out that, if you're interested in learning more about ThreatX and our web application protection, then join us for our live demo scheduled on May 9th. And we will send you info on how to join it. Thanks for your time and in participating in this webinar. And Carol, I'll pass it back to you.
All right, thanks for that great presentation. We do have some questions ready for the Q&A. However, if anyone has a question for our presenters, please enter it into the questions window now. Our first one is a high false positive rate a reflection on my app environment or my WAF vendor?
Okay, I can take this one. So it depends, of course. I hear myself saying it depends on a lot of these questions so far, and that, I guess, is pretty typical in security. But a good WAF, right, and I like to think we have a good WAF, will be able to adjust to the traffic profile and kind of the specific characteristics of your application. If it doesn't, then you're going to see false positives, right? And you could see false positives from, I guess, perfectly benign and expected traffic patterns. Now, on kind of the flip side, your application environment as well definitely can affect the rate of false positives that you're seeing from what might be a reasonably well, tuned WAF. For example, the portal where I go and document attacks that I see across our environment. If I post into one of the forms there that an entity sent a post request with a select star from users, drop tables, so on and so forth, then that is something that definitely looks like a SQL injection attempt, and it's pretty likely that my WAF or any kind of application security product is going to flag that up until it is manually tuned out.
All right, thank you. What's the long-term play for managing these metrics? How often should these metrics be checked?
Well, when it comes to metrics, it's important to balance regular review and being able to see the big picture. And so the big thing I would say here is review them quarterly. You can look at them a little bit more often, but then getting a little more often, you might start to react and respond when there's little nuances in it. Now, the only exception, I would make is probably on the false positive rate. I'd probably look at that one weekly. And I think quarterly might be too long to take before you need to react to it and respond to it and create a plan.
Thank you. If we have a small team and have improvements to make, what metric should we prioritize?
So I'll take this one again. What I would suggest here is, first of all, it seems easy, but portfolio coverage. Understand your attack surface from a web API perspective, and get a process together to catalog those web applications and APIs, as well as updates to them, because that's really going to pay off in the long run. You have something to add here?
Yeah. I guess I wanted to jump in on that as well, on portfolio coverage being, from my perspective as well, a very high priority thing. I guess doing effective risk modeling across your entire environment and being able to say, well, this is a low priority app, this is a test app, there's no real data in it, doesn't have access. That is pretty challenging and easy to get wrong.
Yeah, I believe so. The second one I'd probably throw out there would be attack frequency. And here, the reason is so you understand over time, when do you see more attacks than not? For certain verticals, there is going to be some known cyclical times. And it makes sense to validate that your enterprise either experiences them or has their own pattern. And so just with that, at least if you understand the attack frequency and you understand how often, that's another good justification to your management team for more budget.
Okay, thank you. What are the characteristics of modern, I think you're pronouncing it WAFs, versus a legacy WAF?
Well, I call it a WAF, but you want to take this one first, or you want me to?
I don't have anything on top of my head yet. You can go for it.
Okay, I do.
Yeah.
So when I think about what are some of the modern WAFs with characteristics out there, is some of the things that they need to be able to address are things such as applications changing frequently, which is part of the DevOps processes that all of us in engineering and in development are working on. And so you want to be able to make changes, enhancements to those applications without having to worry about, oh, do I need to do something with my web application protection? It should just work. It should just work. The second thing I would say here is the protection that your solution has should cover the broad spectrum of attacks, from those that are known and well understood. Those should be identified and protected quickly. And for those that are unknown, that suspicious behavior should be tracked to a point where eventually, the activity should be blocked, if not further blacklisted. And so, I think it's important to make sure that the capabilities and the analytics that are behind that solution that you have are able to do both. Next thing I'd probably offer is make sure it's cloud native, as most deployments today are moving to the cloud, and so need to be able to work well in those environments from a deployment perspective and an orchestration perspective. So if you're using Kubernetes, the solution should work well with that. And probably last, and I would say, again, equally important, make sure that that tool has the visibility you need to be able to perform instant investigation. So when something happens, you have the data that you can go ahead and now investigate so you can further understand what exactly is going on. To just say I'm protecting it and I have no data, I don't think that works well in security today.
Yeah, and I can build a little bit on that, I guess. I guess one of the other characteristics that I would say is definitely defines a modern WAF or a current WAF would be context. I guess visibility into your applications, on the back end, understanding what you are running, what version of thing you're running, what looks normal for the application versus doesn't look normal for the application, and being able to kind of leverage all of that different context to apply decisions that make sense for you, as opposed to a more kind of static approach.
All right, well, that's all the questions we have. Do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share?
I'm good. Thanks, everyone, for their time today and listening to us. And hopefully you've gotten a few good ideas from it.
All right, well, thank you so much, Chris and Will, for your great presentation, and to ThreatX for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.